Speaking to people in a unity church is like real home ground for me. I'm very familiar with the New Thought churches, very familiar with the history of the New Thought churches here in the United States. There's a great concentration on inner peace, but there's also a tradition of detachment from political matters. There's a almost chronic political disengagement, not only on the part of people who are involved with the New Thought churches in the United States, but on the part of many really of the most sensitive hearts in the United States. And this has been going on for decades, where some of the people who are most concerned about the deeper issues of life have found the political field and sphere so toxic that they haven't wanted anything to do with it. People would say things like, oh, I'm not political. People feeling that the deeper regions of the heart and of spirituality and of emotion and of psychology and personal transformation, that this was where real change came from. People who have felt that politics was all involved with such oppositional conversation, things that only had to do with symptoms rather than cause, and people, some of the best people in America just didn't even want to do with it. Well, this began something very unfortunate in this country. Because when you have some of the people who do the deepest thinking and the deepest feeling and behaving in ways that are the most conscious and the most wise and the most heartfelt, chronically disengaged from politics, what happened was that politics grew more and more toxic. And then the more toxic it became, the more some of the people living from the deepest depths within ourselves became more disengaged from politics. And the more people living from the most heartfelt, engaged place within themselves became disengaged from the situation, it became more toxic, people became more disengaged, it became more toxic, people became more disengaged until we got to where we are now. And now I do believe there's been a great awakening in this country. And people know we're in trouble. And people know we need to do something. But on the other hand, many of the people who have been so disengaged from politics, even though they know we're in a crisis now, they're not stupid. Everybody knows we need to do something. We're too close to a cliff here. People don't really necessarily want to go back to the political establishment in quite the way they've known it, because that's not where they see answers. That's not where they see solutions. But it's interesting because when you do look at the field of personal transformation and spirituality, everything we've touched, we've changed. Where do you think all those yoga mats come from? Our crowd. Where do you think all this mindfulness stuff comes from? Our crowd. Where do you think all this integrative medicine and wellness, health and wellness stuff comes from? Our crowd. Where do you think all these business retreats that include personal development coaches come from? Our crowd. Everything we touch transforms, and the only reason we haven't transformed politics yet is simply because we haven't gone there yet. And that means that politics as we know it is stuck in a kind of 20th century mentality. It's very mechanistic. It's a product of Newtonian physics, where the world was seen to be just a machine. And so if you wanted to change things, you tinkered with the pieces of the machine. But that's not the 21st century mindset. The 21st century mindset is much more whole person. The 21st century mindset is much more integrative. The 21st century mindset is one that knows that there are things going on beneath the neck. That's one of the reasons why the Republican Party was so gobsmacked by Trump 2 years ago, and why the Democratic Party was so gobsmacked by Bernie Sanders 2 years ago. Because neither establishment could see below the neck. They didn't see beneath the waterline. They weren't registering how people were feeling. But I've been out there in this country for the last 35 years, and I felt the rage. I understood that there was going to be a lot of difficulty for any candidate who wasn't naming the pain or naming the rage. People want to feel their pain is seen. People want to feel that their rage is heard. And so I felt it was going to either be Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders who was going to win last time, because I thought that they both spoke to that populist rage. And I'm not saying Hillary Clinton wouldn't have cared, because I think she did. But she didn't name it, and that was a mistake. In order to have power in a situation, you have to have an understanding of the psychological and emotional realities that are going on there. You can't just look at the symptoms and think, oh, this names it. And definitely you can't look just at the symptoms and think that you can transform it. Well, I don't think that the emotional tenor of this moment is rage. I think the emotional tenor of this moment is exhaustion. I think the tenor of this moment is people just, the last thing that if we want to defeat Donald Trump in next year, the last thing we should go at this with is just fighting Donald Trump every moment. I'll tell you something, I heard one of my fellow candidates on an advertisement saying that he was going to prove that Donald Trump is a fraud and a liar. And I thought to myself, to who? Who doesn't know? Everybody knows he's a fraud, everybody knows he's a liar, people aren't stupid. It's just some people don't care because they like what he's doing. So at this point, we have to, if we really want to transform this country, we have to have a much more whole person understanding of what's happening in this country. And what's happening in this country, ladies and gentlemen, that is dangerous. And I tell you, it is dangerous. Started a lot longer ago than when Donald Trump became president. The worst problems we have in this country were not created by Donald Trump. The worst problems in this country created Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't create it. The worst problems in this country started 40 years ago. The worst problems created in this country started 40 years ago when basically we made an economic theory a false god. We bought into this notion that as long as corporations were making short-term profits and government should get out of the way with their pesky regulations, regulations that do things like, oh, I don't know, protect our health, protect our safety. The idea was that as long as short-term profits for corporations were cared for, as long as the government acted at the behest of corporations that wanted short-term profits, then that's all we had to care about. And then the people who proffered that notion said that it would be a good thing, see, because all this money would be made by these corporations and the money would trickle down. And it would be good because it would lift all boats. But it didn't lift all boats. After 40 years, the jury is in. It not only didn't lift all boats, it left millions of people without a life vest. It has decimated America's middle class. It has created a wealth inequality greater since 1929. And it has created a situation where 1% of all Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now we can hear those facts. Hard data, numbers on a page. But if we're going to have an integrative approach, if we're going to really open to understanding what we need to understand in order to transform things, we have to go deeper than just naming that data. We have to open our hearts to what that means. That means 93 million people living near poverty. It means millions of Americans every single day living with chronic economic tension and anxiety. It means millions of Americans every day who are living with the idea that they really don't know what's going to happen. They don't really know what's going to happen if they get sick. And they don't know what's going to happen if their children get sick. And they don't know how they're going to send their kids to college. And they don't know how they're going to get out from under these college loans. Everybody's tense. Everybody's anxious. And then we wonder where our quote-unquote mental health crisis comes from. Our mental health crisis is the tension and the anxiety, and yes, even the depression, that is inevitable when people are squeezed as much as they're squeezed. And then the same political establishment which created the problem, we look to them to solve our mental health crisis. I'll tell you, I have a great idea for how they should solve the mental health crisis. Stop driving everybody crazy. Yeah. Because that's what happens in America today. People are too squeezed. Too many people are living outside the purview of what allows a person to relax. Because if you have to live more than one job, you have to have more than one job just to put food on the table, you come home late at night, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the energy for your spouse, for your lover, for your friends, or for your kids. You don't have the energy or the bandwidth to be there when the little child is saying, Mommy, Daddy, would you read to me a story? You're so anxious. Nobody has a chance to go after their dreams. And this is the problem when people can't go after their dreams. Money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. You want to see America have an abundant economy, I'll tell you what you do. Uncap people's dreams. Stop thwarting people's dreams. Support people's dreams. Let people soar. Let people spread their wings. That's where money comes from. And that's why all public policy should be built around one core principle, and that's what would help people thrive. And that's why we should have universal health care, just so people don't even have to think about it. That's why we should have free college and universities at state colleges and universities, so that people don't even have to think about it. That's why we should remove these college loan debts. Why? So people don't even have to think about it. Because when people don't even have to think about it, they can get about their business of living. And you get about the business of living, then you can breathe, and you're happier, and you're more at work, and you're a happier employer, and you're a happier employee, and you know how to go after, do your things. All these kids with $1.5 trillion in loan debt, And these tens of millions of young people, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be 24, 25 years old and to have tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars college debt, what this would do to me. I would have no hope of how am I ever going to go after my dreams. So wait a minute, I got this education so that I could go after my dreams, but actually I can't go after my dreams because if I go after my dreams, I can't really rationally think that I will necessarily be able to pay off these college loans. So you have all these people, all these young people who are going after careers that aren't really the careers that they want. They're going after the careers that they want. They're going after the jobs that they think they need in order to pay off the college debt, but the college debt was because they thought if they got that education, maybe they could go after the dreams that they want. And then we wonder why they're depressed. And we have so many Americans who are at jobs they hate. And they're just at those jobs they hate because that's where they're getting their benefits. And all this has gotten so intense that it has made us forget the most essential thing, which is it's not supposed to be like this in America. We're in fog. We've been trained to expect too little. We've been trained to ask pretty please about things that should simply be what could be expected in the richest country in the world. And yet, anytime we look to the political establishment to solve these problems, there's a deeper and a deeper sense that they're not really naming what the deeper problem is. The deeper problem is that this country has gotten away from us. The deeper problem is that this country does not belong to us anymore. You know, there are books. The Bible is a book like this. Big Book of AA is a book like this. Course in Miracles is a book like this. And the Constitution of the United States is a book like this. And those are books which you can never outgrow. They just get deeper and deeper. The deeper you get, the deeper the book is. The smarter you get, the deeper and smarter the book is. The Constitution of the United States is that way. The founding principles of the United States are that way. And this particular principle specifically, our founders said that the only safe repository for power, is in the hands of the people. Not in a political elite, not in a king or queen or an aristocracy or political elite. That's not where the power is supposed to be. Power is supposed to be in the hands of the people. But see, this is the thing. Power is not in your hands if it's not in your head and it's not in your heart. And so we're in foggy right now. You know, in the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. Every generation has to take it in. There's some things you can bequeath to your children. You can bequeath your books, you can bequeath your belongings, you can bequeath your money. Can't bequeath your passion. They're going to have to find their own. Well, the principles of our Declaration of Independence, they're our mission statement, and we have them inscribed on marble walls, and we have them written on parchment, but we're not psychologically and emotionally bonding with them the way we need to generation after generation. We have to rediscover our passion for the radicalism of American democracy generation after generation after generation. And we've been so exhausted that we're forgetting. We're like people who have been in when you're climbing a mountain, and let's say there's an avalanche or a terrible, terrible blizzard. And some people start to just say, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to go to sleep. And everybody knows, no, don't let people go to sleep, because that's how people freeze. And so people who aren't start slapping each other across the face, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep. That's when you'll die. And that's a moment that we're at in America today. Don't go to sleep. Don't go to sleep, because something really bad is going on here. Something really wrong is going on here. There has been a total power inversion. And the people who work for us are acting like we work for them. And the whole idea of the people, by the people, and for the people has been just eroded. And our government isn't a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The government is now a government of a few of the people. A government of, by, and for the health insurance companies, and the big pharmaceutical companies, and the oil and gas companies, and the food companies, and the chemical companies, and the agribusiness companies, and the defense contractors. And hey, anything that's left, good luck with that. It's really okay if the farmers are going bankrupt. It's really okay if the farmers are committing suicide. It's really okay if the crop's not being diversified. It's really okay if we're ruining the topsoil. If it's really okay if people who do not even walk this land in Iowa, it's really okay if people who have never even been here basically own all the land, are in control of farming, and have decimated this most primal thing. Oh, and let me tell you this one, because you might find it kind of interesting. Perry, Iowa. I was in a school in Las Vegas, Nevada, And a high school principal, a lower school principal at a public school in Nevada, Las Vegas, Nevada, told me that she had elementary school students on suicide watch. And that she called the school district to say that they heard that they had one of those mental health counselors that maybe could come and help her. And she was told that they couldn't send her a mental health counselor because her school is not one of the worst. Well, I was telling that story the other day in Perry, Iowa. And a woman told me that when she had heard about the kids being put in cages down at the southern border, that she began making these huge bean bags. And the bean bags are in the shape and the design of a Latina mother for these little kids to be in and feel some comfort. And she went all the way from Perry, Iowa to McAllen, Texas to deliver them. And she tried to, and then she had some left over. And so she brought them back and she delivered them to a school in Perry, Iowa. And she was told by the principal in Perry, "This is great, thank you so much. We can use them in our trauma room." Our trauma room. She said, "What?" She said, "Our trauma room, they're very common in schools these days." And then when I was telling that story last night, 2 nights ago in Council Bluffs, Iowa, I was told by a woman whose child goes to, she said, a very nice public school in Council Bluffs, that in their elementary school, there has been reported that 84 of the children in the elementary school are mentioning suicide. You see, here's the political establishment and what they talk about. And we become like Stepford citizens. Like when I was younger, it was Stepford wives. We're Stepford citizens. We're talking about the things they tell us we're to talk about. Meanwhile, in our hearts, we know something's going on in this country that they're not talking about. And the problem is that they created it. So given the fact that they created it, I think that maybe they should be talking about it. And our children and the unbelievable vulnerabilities and challenges of millions of American children is something we should be talking about. We have millions of American children who live with what psychologists tell us is a PTSD that is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. Where do you think these kids are going to be in 20 years? And we're not going to be discussing this? This is what's happening in America today. There's this establishment, and that includes what I call the campaign industrial complex. It's the media, it's the political establishment, and then here are the people of the United States and what we're living. I love it how they tell us that the economy is good. That Trump's probably going to win because the economy is good, you see. Well, I'm a philosopher, so you can't throw around the word good around me. Don't tell me the economy's good when 13 million children are hungry. Don't tell me the economy's good when 100,000 children are homeless. Don't tell me the economy is good when 93 million people live in near poverty. But they say that because they don't really care necessarily because those children aren't old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. These children aren't old enough to work, so there's no financial leverage there. So how are they possibly going to compete with all the clout of the corporate money that really runs Washington? But you see, it's not just the children. It's everybody else. Anybody know about what happened 2 days ago in the House of Representatives in the United States? You know what happened the other day? Because you should know what happened the other day. Because once this is accomplished, anytime you look up in the stars, it's not going to be like it is now. Because very, very shortly, you won't know what's pointing down at you. You know why? Because they have created a 6th branch of the U.S. military. And this was a Democratic House. This was the Democratic House. They have now passed a bill to continuation of the National Defense Authorization Act. You see, we learned about this at school, the Constitution, that in order for the president to commit an act of war, he has to go to Congress. He has to go to Congress, and he has to get permission from Congress. And we all learned about it when we were kids, how Franklin Roosevelt called the attack on Pearl Harbor a day of infamy, and he went to Congress, and he got Congress's permission to enter into World War II. Ha, 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 ha. Because after 9/11, Congress just surrendered. They gave to the president a National Defense Authorization Act that the president can do whatever the president wants to do to, quote unquote, fight terrorism. So the other day, a bill was passed in the House of Representatives that established a 6th branch of the U.S. military. Think about this. This is not like billions of dollars and we're going to restart and resurgent NASA and it's going to be so amazing. We're going to spend billions of dollars and we're going to explore space. No, 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 that's not what this is. This is the militarization of space. So there's going to be a Navy. You know, the Navy is the water and the Army is the ground and the air is the Air Force, but that wasn't enough. So this is a $738 billion bill. It will establish that. And in addition to that, it actually gives the president even more permission to help the Saudi Arabians in the war that they're prosecuting against Yemen. Now, let's talk about this for a minute. I don't know about you. I was raised to believe, you know, the Americans are supposed to be the good guys. And I'm not saying that we ever were totally the good guys, but I'm old enough to remember a time when there was a national consensus that we were supposed to be. I'm old enough to remember something called the My Lai Massacre. The My Lai Massacre was during the Vietnam War, and it was where American military personnel massacred a village of Vietnamese. Now, it happened. That's the terrible news, but what's the good news, if you might call it that? The whole country hung our head in shame. We at least knew to have healthy shame. We talked about it. We knew something terrible had happened. Here, now, for the sake of $360 billion in an arms sale to Saudi Arabia, which is headed by this murderous, we know murderer dictator, he is waging a genocidal war against Yemen. Tens of thousands of people, including 85,000 children, have starved. And we're doing this for the sake of that $360 billion in arms sale. This is what we have become. And when Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, was asked, how could the United States do this? How could the United States participate in a war like this? He was told, sometimes you can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. That means you have no values. And kudos to Bernie Sanders for expressing, along with Ro Khanna, the appropriate outrage. But it doesn't matter. We're not even talking about it. They tried to stop it. They couldn't override his veto. Now they've given him more power. And they refused in this bill to rein in the president's power to do anything he wants militarily, even if he wants to invade Iran. But the problem is not just that this is happening. The problem is that we're not even talking about it. And we've all gone foggy. We've all been trained. We've forgotten there's been a total power inversion. We've forgotten to guffaw. We've forgotten to say hell no. We've forgotten our rambunctiousness. You know, love does sometimes say no. And there's nothing negative about yelling fire if, in fact, the house is burning down. So this idea of peace, there's no real peace where there's no honest communication. There's nothing spiritual about complacency. Now, this is the thing. We're looking to the political establishment and hoping these guys will just stop this craziness. Let me tell you something, okay? They're not going to. They're not going to because they don't have to. A political establishment is a political status quo, and a political status quo does not disrupt itself. A political status quo perpetuates itself. So even the best people caught within that system, we need a pattern disruption that is something that's like a Shakti, like a pattern, fundamental pattern disruption of the economic and political and social patterns which dominate this country. The US government did not wake up one day and say, let's end slavery. Didn't happen that way. It was the early evangelicals, the early Quakers. People woke up, people rose up, people stepped in. And the US government also did not say, let's give women the right to vote. Why not? That's not what happened. With the women's movement, people woke up, people rose up, and people stepped in. And with the civil rights movement, too, the US government didn't decide to end the segregation. The people woke up, and the people rose up, and the people stepped in. Ladies and gentlemen, our situation today is no less critical than that of the abolitionists, and it is no less critical than that of the women's suffragettes, and it is no less critical than that of the civil rights movement. There are forces which are genuinely and fundamentally corrosive of democracy. The only question, this is not the first generation that's had to face this kind of challenge. The only question is whether or not we'll wimp out on getting the job done. And in our distractedness, there is a real danger that we will do that. And we're sitting here looking at the Republicans and the Democrats like, is mommy going to fix it or is daddy going to fix it? This is more like an alcoholic family where the kids are like sort of realizing that mommy and daddy are both a little nuts and aren't really saying what's really going on. That's what's really going on here. And you know, it's an interesting thing because one thing about New Thought, people who go to unity churches, etc., in our personal lives, we're really very savvy. People who go to churches like this read books like The Sociopath Next Door. People who go to churches like this know all about boundaries, not being fooled, not letting people pull the wool over your eyes. In our personal relationships, we would never stand for this. In our personal lives, we're actually very smart. And in our personal lives, this is where Americans are. I know this. I work up and close and personal with people. In our personal lives, we have a real problem. We stand up and we do what needs to be done. But collectively, politically, we've all kind of gone dumb. And we've all kind of gone dumb because we're talked to like we're dumb. Political operatives actually tell the candidates, we'll talk to them like they're 14. That's about the level of their understanding. And so you know what it means? It means we act like 14-year-olds. We're not processing this. We're not awake. And one of the things we're not awake is we're afraid what it would mean that if all of that is completely messed up, cynicism is just an excuse for not helping. You can't just turn it away. You can't just go away. You have to rise up and say, we don't do that here. That's what we would do as parents. Wouldn't we do that as parents? Who among us, anybody ever had a teenager? Once you've had a teenager, you've had this experience. I've certainly had it. I don't know anybody who's had a teenager who hasn't had it. Where you find yourself saying to them, do you understand me? That will not be happening in this house. Now, it's drugs, it's sex, it's alcohol, whatever it is. But the funny thing is you're laughing to yourself inside because you have no idea what you would do if they challenge you at that moment. But your face is so fierce. That will not be happening. Do you understand? Well, it's not going to be because they're so scared of you in that moment, even though inside you really don't know what card you would pull if they challenge you, but they don't. And they don't because even though you don't know exactly what you would do, you will not stand for it. And why will you not stand for it? Because you love your child. That's why you won't stand for it, because you love your child. And you know, nobody should live only for themselves, and no generation should live only for ourselves either. A space force. A space force? Really? You know, John F. Kennedy said, mankind must put an end to war before war puts an end to mankind. And yet we have a military establishment. Our entire national security agenda is just driven by constant preparation for war. Can you just take medicine, or do you not also have to cultivate health? So just like with the children, we have to do something. That's why I want a Department of Children and Youth. I want a massive realignment of investment in the direction of our children. I want every school in America to be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. If you want your economy to be prosperous in 15 years, take better care of your 10-year-olds today. With every child whose brain we don't actualize from an intellectual and cultural perspective, we're leaving money on the table. And I also, not only do I want a Department of Children and Youth because the incredible vulnerabilities and challenges of the American child completely overwhelm our current structures, Department of Education, et cetera, to handle, while we need trauma-informed education and community wraparound services and restorative justice and anti-bullying and violence prevention and mindfulness in the schools. We have to have that same level of fundamental repair work done with war and peace. You can't just, you know, one candidate says, well, as far as they go, we will have universal preschool. This is like what century do you think we're in? Many of these children are traumatized before they go to preschool. And poverty is a trauma, and hunger is a trauma. We had the tech companies say that there were 45 million on the internet impressions of sexual violence and abuse of children last year alone. The problems are so incredible, and our politicians are like talking like, I don't know, like it's 1987 or something. But everybody I know knows, no, we got some deeper problems here. And the same with war and peace. The most I hear about them, about these things, and like I said, Bernie's totally on it about Yemen. But even so, we're still talking like there's no fundamental challenging of the fact that the military-industrial complex rules our national security agenda. The idea of short-term profits for defense contractors is the primary factor guiding our foreign policy decisions. So can you just take medicine, or do you not also have to cultivate wellness? Can you just prepare for war, or should you not also cultivate peace? Donald Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense under George Bush, and he said we have to learn to wage peace. So this is your money. So I just want to talk to you for a minute about your money. You spend $760 billion a year on the military. You spend $40 billion a year on the State Department, which is development and diplomacy and mediation. Within that $40 billion, you spend $17 billion on what's called the USAID, which is long-term development and humanitarian assistance, and then a little less than $1 billion on what's called the peace-building agencies. Now, think of peace building like you think of the health and wellness community. You have to cultivate your health. Sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. So we have to cultivate peace because war is the absence of peace. And in order to cultivate peace, there are 4 factors which, when present, statistically indicate that there will be greater peace. Greater peace, whether it's in a corner of the American city or another part of the world. And you know what those factors are? They will not shock anyone here. Expanded economic opportunities for women, expanded educational opportunities for children, reduction of violence against women, and the amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk, because they are. Desperate people do desperate things, and desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, whether those forces are in a gang in a corner of an American city or a terrorist organization around the world. But we don't do that. We don't spend so much money on reducing human suffering. Ha ha ha. That's what you would do if you actually wanted to nip war in the bud, because there are no corporate profits to be made there. We spend our money more on preparing for war than on preparing for peace. This is how corrupt it is. This is how corrupt it is. Our governmental policies, more than not, advocate for short-term profits for corporations rather than for peace, rather than for people, and rather than for planet. And this is not going to stop until we, the people, stop it. And that's the situation that we're in. That's the situation that we are in. In my whole health plan, another example of treating not just the symptom. Everybody's talking about universal health care, and we do need universal health care. But we need to do more than just talk about how we're going to pay for universal health care. We also need to talk about why are we so sick compared to the citizens in other countries? And we need to talk about what kind of care we're going to have. Why do we have so much more chronic illness than they have in other countries? I'll tell you why. Because of the contaminants in our water, and because of the carcinogens in our food, and because of the toxins in our air. Do you know that McDonald's cannot make the same French fry in France that McDonald's can make in the United States? Because France protects its food supply? And you think what's going on here in Iowa in these animal factory farms have nothing to do with the contaminants in your water? Or, for that matter, all the antibiotics in our food? The fact that people in places like the National Institutes of Health are so nervous about what's coming down the road because there are more and more drug-resistant bacteria because there are so many antibiotics. But hey, you think anybody's going to mess with the chemical companies or the food companies or agribusiness? The chemical companies, you know, during the Obama administration, there was a particular fertilizer that every single scientist working for the EPA during the Obama administration said should be permanently banned because of the known harm that it does to a developing child's brain. But one of the first things that happened in this administration was that the then head of the EPA, he was an oil company guy. The one there now is a chemical company guy. Well, he had a meeting, a secret meeting in a hotel room in Houston, my native hometown, with Dow Chemical Company executives. And what did they do? They overturned the ban. Oh, but Monsanto got caught the other day well, it wasn't just the other day, but recently they got caught for having used a banned pesticide. They used it even though it was outlawed. And not only that, even using it, they made their workers go back to the acreage in which it was used after 14 days, even though even before it was outlawed, they weren't supposed to do that for 31 days. You know what kind of a punishment Monsanto got? Anybody want to guess? $10 million. You know what $10 million is to Monsanto? Take $1 out of your pocket, because that's about what it is. So, in my whole health plan, if you go to the doctor and the doctor is prescribing a surgical option or a big pharmaceutical option, it will also be mandated that you are told what is the lifestyle or the dietary changes that are scientifically established to be equally as effective at healing, even reversing your disease. We know that now about stents. Do you see that article the other day? Heart stents. We now know everybody's been getting stents in their heart, someone we know, and now they've actually proven that dietary and lifestyle changes are just as effective at treating that. But so much money is given by the pharmaceutical companies to our medical schools, and in most medical schools, all that doctors get is like 1 semester in the relationship between food and disease. So in my whole health plan, it is actually mandated that you will hear about what your options are of integrative medicine, as well as your surgical and pharmaceutical options, and your insurance has to pay for that as well.
Yes.
You see, we have to have a deeper conversation. We can't just talk about what we're going to do in this military thing or that military thing. We have to talk about the way the whole system is dominated by people just seeking to make money off war. We have to talk about what it will take to create peace. We can't just talk about more money for education. We have to talk about the profound vulnerabilities of American children. We can't just talk about how we're going to pay for health care. We have to talk about how we're going to pay for health care, but we also have to talk about why we're sick. I want to do more than provide health care. I want to provide greater incentives for health. I want to provide a healthier America. And for that, you're going to have to take on those forces. You see, we have one political party who hears about all the stuff that we're talking about, and that political party is filled with too many people who say, yeah, what of it? But we have another political party. It's also a problem because it's filled with too many people who say, God, this is terrible. I really feel terrible about this. I really feel awful about this, and I'm going to do everything possible to ameliorate your pain, but that's not enough. We have to challenge the underlying forces that make all that pain inevitable. We have, there's a man named George Lakoff, and years ago he was talking about how the Democratic Party was like the stern father, and the Democratic Party was the nurturing mother. I was on a conference call with George one day. I said, George has so gotten beyond that. The stern father has become an abusive father, but the nurturing mother is just standing in the hall feeling so terrible. She's not calling the police, though. She's not calling the police, and she's not saying, take your hands off that child. And that's what we need. And I'll tell you something else. Interestingly enough, in terms of political realities, when the child grows up in that situation at therapy, the first anger they process is against the mother for having let it happen. We're on our own here. When Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, realized what kind of president we have, he says, Europeans, we're on our own here. Well, you know what, ladies and gentlemen? So are we. But actually, we're not. We've just forgotten who's the boss here. And we've become this spectator sport, and we're looking at the Democrats, we're looking at the Republicans. It's all become a spectator sport. Can they handle it, or can they handle it? Something else has to arise in our midst. Something else. There's only one antidote to this. There's only one antidote to this, and that's an awakening among us. That's an awakening among us. Something happens when we say, no. We didn't get it before, but we get it now. And then nothing will be the same. But nothing less than that will really change this. Nothing less than that will change this. And then when we do awaken, it's not something that's just going to be fixed in Washington. I heard one of my fellow candidates say that they want to go to Washington and fight for you. I don't. I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. I want to go to Washington and co-create with you. Because what has to be done in Washington, you know where else it needs to be done? Down the street. Because the same stuff going on in the Capitol in Washington is going on in the capital of Des Moines. These forces are everywhere. They are on state levels, they are on federal levels, they're on state levels. And the reason these thieves were able to get into the house is because we left the windows open and we left the doors open. We have to take responsibility for that. But you know, it's okay, because once you see that and you wake up, you're like, okay, I get it. You know, Churchill said, you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after we've exhausted every other option. We're kind of famous for getting there late, but we're also famous for the fact that once we do get there, we slam it like nobody's business. This generation must rise up now. We have a lot to do. We must do all the things that I said. We must reverse climate change. We must lead the world in the most amazing greening effort. We have 7 years to do it. If we do not do it within 7 years, we could have a massive social collapse within 20 years, unlike anything we've seen in the modern era. We could have whole swaths of countries and continents where it is so hot that the land is uninhabitable. And if the land is uninhabitable, you cannot grow food there. And if you cannot grow food there, you're talking food shortages. And if you've got food shortages, you're talking economic collapse. You've got all those things, you're talking about hundreds of millions of environmental refugees. No generation should just live for itself. But this is not going to change because we've got our dukes up against oil and gas. It can't quite be like that. You didn't fight World War II with the Republicans fighting the Democrats all the time. It can't be like that. The same industries that have caused industrial scale harm must be enrolled in industrial scale repair. We have to respect the fact, we wouldn't have been able to fight World War II without fossil fuels. And we must respect the fact that thousands of people have jobs working at basically a dirty energy. And they have a right to feel their government has their back during this just transition. And we need to talk more about that. We need to talk more about the people whose lives will be affected, about how they are needed in the transition, how we need their creativity, their productivity, their research, their development, and their manufacturing. They need to be included in this conversation. The last thing we need to be doing is making everybody who represents anything like that feel that we've got their dukes up to them. One of the things that my career has given me is extensive travel. But that's not only geographical travel, it's also socioeconomic travel. And I have to tell you, I kind of have the ability of saying to a billionaire, you have to pay more taxes, right? And my experience with more than you would realize is, yeah, you're right, I know. But you can't be like this. That's not the moment. This is not the moment, and it's not going to work. And if that's all we do, then okay, we win. But see, this is the thing. This is so much bigger than defeating Donald Trump. Donald Trump is just a symptom. If all we do is beat Donald Trump, then we must beat Donald Trump, don't get me wrong. But if that's all we do, those forces will be back in 22 in the midterms, and boy, will they be back in 24. We have to do more than not fall over the cliff. We have to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. We need deep transformation. And that's going to come now because the people are going to take it from here. And that's what we need to do. But we need a different kind of thinking. And the last major issue I want to point out, that I think if we really want the future that's the 21st century, that's the amazing chapter we should have. And we can have. We can have the most amazing chapter. But in order to do that, whether you're a country or a person, all that a country is a collection of people. You can't have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. It's time to pay reparations for slavery. And it's time to take reparative measures towards Native Americans. What are we doing? We are passing this toxic baton, generation to generation. Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. Doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it's gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. If we pay reparations for slavery, there's not going to be a suck on our economy. It's certainly not going to be a suck on our economy compared to the $2 trillion 2017 tax cut that gave 83 cents of every dollar to the very richest individuals and organizations, and that there's no evidence will ever even pay for itself. We pay reparations for slavery. All that's going to do is stimulate our economy, because it's been established if black families made as much money as white families, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. If we pay money, my plan is $500 billion over 20 years to be dispersed by a reparations council for purposes of economic and educational renewal. All that's going to do is stimulate your economy. That's going to be a lot more of an economic stimulant than that 2017 tax cut. It's really time for us to think about our problems the same way we think about problems in every other area of life. In every other area, we don't just think about tinkering with things on the outside. And we sure as heck don't think about doing things the same way they were done before. Americans are generative, and we're creative, and anybody who has any kind of business or anything knows if it's not working on Wednesday, you change it by Saturday. But politics is like it's stuck, it's entrenched, it's like it didn't get the memo. So if it didn't work on Wednesday, but the people who are paying you want you to keep doing it that way, you keep doing it that way anyway. It's not going to change unless we change it. And so I know in terms of my candidacy, oh, I'm an outsider. And you know what I say to this, she's an outsider thing? Outside what? Outside what? Outside what? So the Constitution says to run for president, you have to be 35, check that. Have to have been born here, check that. Has to have lived here for 14 years. If the founders had wanted to say, you had to have been a senator, you had to have been a congressman, or you had to have been a governor, they would have, and they didn't for a reason. They were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself what skill set that generation feels is most necessary to navigate the times in which we live. I believe in order to navigate the times in which we live, we need more than a good mechanic. We need more than somebody who knows how to drive the car. We need somebody who knows what road we're on, particularly given the fact we're on the wrong road. We need political vision now more than we need political mechanics. Washington has a lot of good mechanics. And the Democratic Party really has a lot of good mechanics. It's political vision that we're lacking. And that's why Franklin Roosevelt said that the primary responsibility, he said the biggest job of the presidency is moral leadership. We lack moral certitude. This business about political experience, very politically experienced people led us into Iraq. And very politically experienced people led us into Vietnam. Very politically experienced politicians led us here. And let us not fool ourselves that this all started with Donald Trump because it got us to the point where he was even possible. So, I say, there are different kinds of qualifications. And there's different kinds of experience. And I hope it doesn't sound arrogant. There are some people who say I'm not qualified to do what they can do. With all due respect, they're not qualified to do what I can do. We need someone who doesn't just fight. We need someone who knows how to inspire. We need someone who knows how to motivate. We need someone who knows how to enroll. And we need someone who knows that moral certitude is the most important thing of all. And we need someone who knows that we need to change from an economic to a humanitarian bottom line. And it should not be short-term corporate profits for anybody that is guiding our public policy. The question that should guide our public policy should be what would help people thrive. Because that's where money comes from. Money doesn't come from a bunch of jobs, job creation, falling from the table of corporate aristocrats in crumbs that they've dropped from the table in the form of job creation. Money comes from the productivity and the creativity of the American people. The American people deep in our hearts, who I think feel this way towards the U.S. government. Give me health care, give me a good education, and give me a fair shot. I'll create my own damn career. That's where I think most people are. Just give us a shot. Give me a space and watch me soar. But we have political policies that do more to thwart people's dreams than to support people's dreams. It's so upside down. Well, we need to remember, we need to identify with others who in their time did what we need to do today. It was the abolitionists, it was the women's suffragettes, it was the civil rights movement. They saw wrong and they said no more. That stops right here. They knew, and that's what the religious communities give. If we're talking about being in a church, this is what churches give you. You know, I know some people say, oh, Miss Williamson, she's just naive, you know. She's naive. She thinks love should govern everything. Love should be the organizing principle. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you who's naive. What's naive is to think that this species will necessarily last another 100 years on this planet if we don't try. That's what's naive. No, you don't say to people who come from a religious or spiritual background, you just don't understand about evil. No, we understand about evil. Oh, you would know how to deal with evil, but no, that comes from that comes from the religious and the spiritual perspective. And one of the things you know about evil, when you really know about evil, nip it in the bud. And every time you let a child be hungry, you're letting evil in. Every time you let a child be traumatized, you're letting evil in. Anytime you let people suffer and there was no need for them to suffer, you're letting evil in. No. It's not like we're so stupid, we just don't understand. Not at all. I'm an American woman, I'm an American mother. And you don't have to say to any American woman, you certainly don't have to say to any American mother, oh, we don't know what to do to protect our children. We have shown over and over again we will do anything to protect our children. And a common anthropological characteristic of any advanced mammalian species that survives and thrives is the fierce behavior of the adult female of the species when she senses a threat to her cubs. And mama bear, mama tiger, mama lion. When you go, I remember I went hiking once and was told, the black bears will be fine. They don't bother you. Just don't come near their babies. They'll come after you. Our babies are in trouble. And the love that will save the world today is not just love for our own children. It's got to be love for children on the other side of town. It's got to be love for the children on the other side of the earth. My mother used to say the main job of a woman was to take care of her children and her family and her home. And I thought my mother was wrong. I thought she was old-fashioned. I wanted to go out there and do something more important. I realize now that my mother was correct on a fundamental archetypal level. It is our job to take care of the children. It's just that means everybody's children. And it is our job to take care of the home. It's just that the home is the earth itself. Our entire economic system was designed before women had a role in the public sphere. We didn't have a voice in the public sphere. And taking care of children was just considered a woman's work. Well, we have power now. We have a voice now. And too much of the feminist conversation is about how to get more power, which is not that that's a meaningless conversation. We still need the ERA, we still need pay equity, et cetera. But we need to have more of a conversation about what to do with the power that we have now. First, you take care of your babies, and you take care of your home. And that means everybody's babies, and it means the earth itself. We need more than that voice rising up from the bottom of things. If you ask me, we need a mother in the White House, and you can take that however you want. Thank you very, very much.